With that said, I want to thank you all for this first session of day 2. We have 2 great speakers. We have Michael Runningwolf and we have Caroline Runningwolf. Michael Runningwolf is from McGill University. Caroline Runningwolf is from the University of British Columbia. And their session is called How HR and AI Can Be Used to Reclaim Indigenous Languages. So I'm going to invite them up right now.
Well, thanks so much for having us here on Muskwekwe Ohlone land. We're very grateful to have this opportunity. And as we're waiting for the slides, we'll just start by introducing ourselves.
Yeah, so go ahead. Go.
My name is Caroline Runningwolf. I'm a citizen of the Abzalika, also known as the Crow Nation, located in southeastern Montana. And
Yeah, and I am Michael Runningwolf. I am Lakota, Cheyenne, Lakota, Cheyenne, and Blackfeet, and stop. And enemy tribe of, all those are tribes or enemy tribes of the Abzalika Crow. And I think we're just waiting for almost 1 more second. Sorry about that.
okay, there we are.
Ooh. Yes, and so we are all the stereotypical indigenous peoples, and we live in teepees. We're the feather.
Yeah. Oh, what happened?
Yeah.
What?
So we are the feather indigenous people, and we live in teepees, and this teepee village is.
Those are my teepees. Those are my family's teepees. This is at our largest celebration of the year, the Crow Fair, which is also teepee capital of the world.
Yeah, and we're here to talk about languages. Unfortunately, what this map is a representation of the language diversity in North America. Each of these colors represents a distinct indigenous language family. And so in these families, you may have a handful of languages, or like with the gold you see up there is the Algonquin language, which spans nearly most of North America. And then there you have hundreds of languages in that subset. Then you have other, and you can see this is actually a map of colonization. White means no data, meaning the indigenous languages are not being spoken. And you can see manifest destiny creeping westward with a high language density here in the west and the northwest. And unfortunately, of the languages in the United States of America, over 90% of all languages are nearly extinct, and we are likely within the next 5 to 10 years going to lose a vast majority of our indigenous languages. And so what can we do about that?
So our dream is to create immersive, accessible, indigenous experiences. The opportunity to immerse ourselves in our culture, to practice our language skills, and to build community.
And so to build to this vision of the future, we have to deal with some key technical challenges. And one of them, which is indigenous languages in North America are fundamentally different than languages outside in Europe and in Asia, for example. In languages in North America, for example, we have very different morphology. There is this phenomena in linguistics called polysynthesis, and languages in North America are very highly polysynthesis, and so polysynthetic. And so you can think of, what does that mean exactly? So in linguistics, you have this concept of a morpheme, which is the smallest amount of sound that conveys meaning. So if you say the phrase, the red car, you have 3 morphemes in there, conjugation of to be, color, and automobile. And polysynthesis is the red cars. If you put that S on there, when you put the little S suffix on cars and making it plural, that's polysynthesis. And English is a particularly non-polysynthetic language, or is an isolate.
Low.
Yeah, low polysynthesis. And it's important to note that this is a gradient. There's no languages that are perfectly polysynthetic and no languages that are perfectly non-polysynthetic. It's a gradient. And this is one of the technical challenges we must address, and is not addressed actually in machine learning yet.
And these polysynthetic words, they encode traditional knowledge. They encode sacred teachings. And for example, the word sutras is a Nuchalnuth word, and it literally translates to landholder. And so you can see how there's knowledge encoded in that word for a tree. And if you just imagine, like, would the logging companies just not think about what they're doing and raid hillsides if they thought of trees as landholders? So for us, language data is not just about bits and bytes. It's sacred language, it's sacred knowledge, and it's really important to have the data sovereignty, to keep that data sovereignty.
And so I would like you to introduce you to a new initiative. It's the First Languages AI Reality Initiative. It's based in Mila in Quebec, which is a research lab in Montreal. And we are working there at this initiative, at the FLAIR initiative, to merge linguistic AI, artificial intelligence research, and XR. Like as we were saying earlier, we're trying to build community through technology, merging the old ways with the new. And you can see my mom recording Cheyenne language audio, and my dad playing with an early prototype of a Lakota thing. You know, my parents are technologists.
And one of our community partners is James Ross, who's a former chief of the Gwich'in in Northwest Territories, Canada. And the Gwich'in people, their spread, or their territory spans from Alaska, Yukon, and Northwest Territories, closely interwoven with the fate of the caribou herd, the porcupine caribou herd. And so James and the initiative that he founded, Virtual Gwich'in, is really excited about following along with language revitalization using automatic speech recognition and also creating immersive VR experiences, 360 dome projection, interactive maps, and using all of this in concert for interactive educational tools. And we're working with him on the language side.
And as we're working with elders and we're working in the machine learning space, a key problem emerges. There are simply not enough of us Indigenous people as practitioners of artificial intelligence and XR. Toward that end, we're also co-founders of an initiative that's going to start in 2 weeks, which is actually a little bit scary, where we get high schoolers on Lakota land, and this is a prototype due to expand. Started in 2022, last year. What we were doing is taking high schoolers who are Lakota and teaching them basic computer science and so forth, and we'll talk about that a little more shortly.
But it's also important to get them on the land, to have them learn the cultural context, to do, in this case, data gathering, together with knowledge holders, learning about medicinal plants while being on the land, learning about the traditional Lakota names for those plants and the stories that explain the healing properties or the poison that you have to be aware of and all of that. And this is one of my favorite pictures.
Yeah, we're teaching in this culturally context way. We're also not ignoring the technology. So I'm a former industry engineer. I worked over 10 years on enterprise scale AI. I'm a former Amazon engineer. And I actually was lazy. There are educational frameworks out there that you can teach children basic programming concepts. I said, I don't have time to learn that. I'm just going to teach them what they taught me in industry. So we use Docker, we use Jupyter, we use Python, PyTorch specifically, and we also use Unity and XR development. So the application that they developed, they learned how to build Unity and learned basic Python programming, learned how to do data science. In this picture, you can see them. They created their very first model after 5 days of instruction for how to predict a basketball game, all by themselves, self-motivated. We found some clean data and said, go at it. And some of them did NFL, some of did basketball, some did soccer. And it was quite amazing. We had individuals age ranged from 13 years old to 18, and our best programmer in Unity was a 13-year-old. And then this quickly kind of emerged, these two phenomena, two realizations that I had is that we can do this. Indigenous children who have never really had access to internet or even computers can program with good instruction And the second realization was that we have a lot of talent that's not being cultivated. We just simply are not giving Indigenous children the opportunity to advance their careers.
Yeah, and that's basically what we're passionate about in a nutshell. Languages, empowering community members, training the children, and also the adults to know how to do these things, technology and non-technology, on their own without necessarily needing us for that.
Yes, and it's critical to explain that this is urgent work. Indigenous languages are critical to our identity and who we are and our relationship to our land, the plants, the ecology. But we also face large technical challenges. We don't have the talent that we need. We don't have the resources, the funding to support these initiatives as easy as we would like. But we can do this together. The fundamental artificial intelligence strategy is communal, intertribal. We are pulling in the resources and the languages of a variety of communities together, because that's the only way we're going to solve these key large-scale endemic problems of language losses together. And we also need to, the part in words for you is you also need to cultivate the future through systems like Lakota AI Code Camp, and working in partnership with our elders. And something we forgot to mention is that Virtual Gwich'in is being run by an individual who's nearly 70 years old. He's just a pure technologist. He saw this out and said, we want to build XR. And I think we have a little bit of time for questions. And if you want to learn more, we have QR codes to the various initiatives on the screen right now. So.
Yeah, we were trying really hard to stay within the time limit.
Yes.
Hi, thank you. This was so beautiful. I'm honored to be here, and thank you for sharing. So I'm Ruth Diaz, and I'm a virtual creator. I'm curious about if you've thought about how social VR plays into this work you're doing, and what kinds of platforms you've explored, or if you think there's risks or concerns there. That's how I would like to support and contribute.
We have thought about social VR. It comes up frequently. The issue that we've run into is that there's just not enough people who are fluent in the language, or even semi-fluent in the language, and so the functionality of meeting up in a virtual space and then holding conversations with other people who are also in that space and speak that language, it's just too rare at this time. And that's kind of the reason why we pivoted to automatic speech recognition, so that we can have that opportunity of speaking the language, applying the language in the cultural context, and having, either responding to or having the AI respond to us in the language.
But that's on the roadmap. That is the long-term goal, that we would, quite frankly, the fluent speakers right now are non-technical, they're elderly for a lot of communities. And so, but long-term, yes, we would love anyone to join and learn Lakota in XR, in the metaverse, in the shared social experience, and be able to, as allies and community members, communicate in these vibrant languages. Good question.
Thank you.
We have another question.
Hi, I'm coming from a multimedia storytelling lab at Harvard that is dedicated to Asian cultural history, and really appreciate all of the urgent work that you're doing. For us, we're actually very interested in kind of multimedia storytelling and cultivating kind of multi-sensory experiences by combining data sets from things like textual records with 3D object reconstruction and even music as well. One of our recent projects used an ethnographic music archive taken at Buddhist monasteries from across China. And I would like to just ask if it's possible to also make room for music in your consideration of language, and also if there might be potential barriers in the way that AI is not trained to hear music, or perhaps that music possibly could offer some linguistic contributions, but if you've thought at all about opening up other data sets beyond written language or spoken language.
Yeah, so we actually did, and I love hearing about what you're doing. Would love to connect more later as well. So one of the things is that to learn a language, if you think back to way back when, as a small child, you didn't memorize vocabulary lists. You learned the language through nursery rhymes and children's songs and the rhythm of the songs and all of that. And so one of the communities that we're working with, the Kwakwaka'wakw people in North Vancouver Island in British Columbia, they've already said that they would want us to incorporate songs, for example, canoe journey songs, and also potlatch songs into the data set and also into the VR experiences. And so that's something we're definitely wanting to do. I think it's too early for us to say whether it works from the AI side.
From a technical perspective, we don't have a lot of data, unfortunately. And yes, a lot of our data is song, by the way. From an artificial intelligence perspective, our key focus right now is this basic language learning application. So we're not trying to build the Siri competitor in a different language. What we're trying to do is a subset of the language, just keep small steps. Yes, eventually we'll be able to recognize song, and there's some interesting research in the ML field for that. We just don't have the data, and it's time and energy and money and expense, as you know. But yeah, it's a really good question. I appreciate that. That sounds exciting. Reach out to us, by the way.
Yes, please. And so we have time for maybe one more question. If anybody has a question they would like to ask.
Good afternoon. My name is Mickey Harris. I'm a professor at Morehouse College. And a lot of the work I do with storytelling is on a small island called Barbuda in the Caribbean. The village is 1,500 people. We have limits with access to Wi-Fi, but we have a dialect of English that's very insular that no one else in the Caribbean speaks. And nothing is recorded, documented. And the question I have is, have you encountered the education system or government or structures that are trying to wash away the language? So it's not just preservation and protection, but also convincing the people who are actually in charge of education in spaces that this need is valuable.
Yeah, so why are 90% of Native American languages nearly extinct? It's because of government policy. My parents' generation, my father, for example, had his mouth washed out with soap if he spoke Lakota in boarding school. And it was a systemic process. It was, kill the Indian, save the man was the policy of the American government up until probably the mid 1960s, 70s. Of course, obviously, that's kind of a lie. That became, these policies still exist to this day. In Canada, it's far worse. These policies only ended in the 10, 15 years ago. And they still have these policies of suppressing indigenous languages. And obviously, we are all colonized. The world is recovering from a very traumatic period. And one of the victims is our languages. And yes, from a computational standpoint, for machine learning, I think it would be totally doable to create AI for the language community you're speaking of. Of course, it's just going to take resources and energy. But there is interesting research out there for minority variant or dialects of English, and I don't want to say it's a dialect of English, but it sounds like its own distinct language. But because it's so related to English, I suspect that it shouldn't be too hard. I've seen interesting research, particularly in enabling automatic speech recognition for people with Down syndrome. Those kind of avenues probably would be useful, like maximizing existing research. I think.
One more?
We have one more question.
Hi, thanks. Robert Pluma. I'm working to preserve the history and stories of my Coahuiltecan ancestors and wanting to use emerging technologies to do so. And I'm wondering what sort of challenges you've encountered in pulling in folks who maybe don't have as much experience with this, but wanting to get them involved, and what have been some effective strategies to really keep them engaged with this and help both work on the cultural side and on the technological side.
I'll skip ahead to the some of the strategies to keep them engaged is definitely breaking it down to have smaller successes throughout, and not just the big success at the end of a 2-year or 3-year period, and then. Most of the way that we work is we have the Indigenous community approach us. They're interested in the topic. They maybe know more or not as much about how to apply it, the technology, but they see the potential. And so they approach us and they ask us, how can we do this? Can we move forward together? And that's when we start laying out, the plans together with the community and figuring out which is the best pathway and what should we focus on first and how do we break it down into those small successes throughout that journey.
The TLDR is have a Caroline who's willing to invest energy and effort. I'm a nerd. And it's also come in as humble. Even though you may be a community member, or even if you're Indigenous, when you're working with another family or another community, they have their own ways. And it's going to take a long time. We are currently in discussions with a tribe local to California, and we just began the outreach. They're interested in working with us, and it's going to take months before we get to the next stage. And it's going to take time. These communities are traumatized. They're worried about outsiders. They're even worried about change internally. Like my community, my mother's community, Cheyenne, we're very conservative in embracing new technology. And so it's going to take a while. It's not going to happen tomorrow. You're not going to be able to call up and say, it's not going to move at San Francisco Bay Area VC speed. It's going to move at the scale of grants. And I think a really good conversation opener would be, let's apply for grants together. And because government grants take forever. And so it's going to be on that scale. So I think that's a really good start point. I think that's it.